Welcome to Big Al's News Lot. Brand new news. Where our motto is, eat here, pay here. Now the news. It almost made sense. Of course, it did make sense. I say things like it almost makes sense so that you got to weigh out and go, well, so I didn't actually miss it. Oh, yeah, you did. And now the news. A man asked himself, what truly am I? When I'm ill, I think of death. When I'm happy, I think of how wonderful it is to be alive. What is this thing within me that I so freely call my I? How can it be me, or in some way belong to me, if it is so completely driven by forces which are accidental and outside of me? Perhaps I should think of a new name for this thing in me that I call me, but which obviously is something quite a bit less than. Perhaps I should call it exactly what it is. Nah, better not. I'm not sure if I'm up to that. I'm not sure anyone is. End quote. Past a certain point in this effort, the scene appears not unlike a man with an annoying wild creature in his yard which he cannot seem to trap, or even be sure that captures the only or proper approach in dealing with it. Many, many things stand between a man and his enlightenment, and they're each and all his imaginary, separate sensations of himself. Anyone who states what they claim to know as a fact, then adds cautions and additional details regarding how they should not be misunderstood, doesn't know what they're talking about. If a simple fact could be actually told, at least half of those who heard it would misinterpret it, and the other half who didn't would still get it wrong. Headline, regarding the sight of those, well done. Where others see things, they see the shadows of things. Where others see events, they see their reflections. Few are they who ever realize that if you look through the wrong opening, everything appears distorted. The operational salvation at work is this. If you never realize this, you're obviously never aware of the distortions. And what might be of further minor interest is the fact that if you never discover the unfaithful appearances of everything, it doesn't matter. Not realizing it doesn't affect your life one way or the other. It's only with those who do realize it that any impact occurs. How's about yet another proverb update? How's about you go beyond such notions as, the truth shall set you free, on to the simple side of things as they are will loose you from such meaningless verbiage as the truth and freedom. So long as you can see yourself as captive, you are captive. Captive of shadows and of reflections. And oh yeah, remember, an epigram to a blind man might as well be an essay. A shower to the stupid, a storm. A dialogue. We must eradicate conflict. Yes, and then men can live together in peace. I'm not talking about people in the plural. A father grilled a son. What's the difference between describable and despicable? None, he replied, and was rewarded with a grilled worm sandwich. Headline, the ultimate word regarding the matter of existence. If someone says that a thing exists, there's no arguing with it. It's too late for that now. And yet one more adage readjusted. Fools don't rush in where angels fear to tread, but rather things as they are trample all over the mind's conceptions thereof. A man on the roof said to the man hanging from the ledge, "Let go." And the man hanging from the ledge asked, "Are you God?" "Yes," said the man on the roof. And finally the man hanging did let go. And to himself God thought, "Guess I should have identified myself sooner." Our new law for the day. Timing is everything, except when you're flying through space. And of course around here we only speak of internal space, in which case there's never any time but now. I'll let go tomorrow. That's not possible. Okay, sometime next week. Well, how about when I get to St. Louis? We've already been through that. Headline, Understanding the Problem. A boy said to his father, "I am so confused." And the elder replied, "It's no wonder. Look how many of you have involved." Headline, The Math of Understanding Awakening. More than one into one won't go. According to an extremely curious legend, there was once a well-known and quite popular system for enlightenment, which many students thereof heralded as successful. And a system which, are you ready for this, made sense. From top to bottom, beginning to end, made sense. Can you believe that? I guess that there again is an example of what distinguishes facts from legend. Legends are far too easy to believe. Well, finally, history, news, and gossip are weather reports regarding imaginary atmospheric conditions. One little hard-nosed mystic has narrowed it down in his view to this: there's the world of the mind and the world of the behind, the realm of digestion and that of digression, and there the twain shall meet, except in man. In one man's private notebook we find this entry: if there is a difference to be noted between entertainment and information, then it should be somewhere along these lines. Entertainment, hot sauce. Information, ice cream. Entertainment, cocaine. Information, champagne. Entertainment, a tornado. Information, a placid pool. Entertainment, sex. Information, the cigarette afterwards. Understanding, of course, being something beyond all of this. End quote. Insofar as knowing anything is concerned, a man is never so alone as while believing that there is more of him than there is. It requires many to be stupid. Only one can be wise. Headline, applicable only in New Hampshire, Vermont, Oregon, and California. A man asked a stranger, Can you imitate the awakened? Only when empty, he replied. Headline, another maxim realignment. History does not repeat itself. History repeats man. The ordinary believe that gods, demons, the dead, and their subconscious speak to them. Only the few know the true source of these sounds. A man asked the great oracle, "Is there some secret knowledge that will set a man free?" And from the oracle's cubicle came the reply, "Turn down that radio, I can't make out what you're saying." The king told the prince, "There is no you." And the prince replied, "But I feel that there is." And the king said, "But only when you say that there is." "No," replied the prince, "I feel it to be so even when I am silent." And the king said, "Ah, but even then you're thinking that there is a you, and then that is what makes you feel that there is, even when there is not." And then the prince didn't know what to say in response. Long live the blank. The blank is dead. I've noticed that late Baroque French history does not have the popularity that it used to. Headline, The Enlightened Man's Guide to Anger. You can't be mad at someone if they're not home. One man said to his mind, but it didn't answer. It couldn't listen. Not while he was talking. If you can believe it, there's still men in this day and time who want to cut the legs off of their radios to keep them from roaming about. Can you believe that? Who is dumber than the dumb, more misguided, gimpy, and given to misstep than the blind? Those whose complete rap is based on the words of the enlightened, now dead. Yet another area in which the few part decisive company with the musical majority. Amongst the few there are no golden oldies. Standing just off stage with his axe case in his hand, the on-call filler standby told the leader of the band, "I'm here ready anytime you need me." And without glancing his way, the maestro replied, "If I've ever heard you before, that won't be necessary. I won't be calling on you." Headline, Conclusiveness and the Bout. The match is over when the last man's left the ring. A man asked a stranger, "How can I use thought to awaken?" "You can't," he replied. Several years later, the man returned and asked the stranger, "How can I use thought to awaken?" "You can't," he replied. And the man said, "But I have been doing so and have made progress." "All right," said the stranger, "ask me about it again once you have awakened, and I'll explain it to you. For only then will you be able to understand what I've said about thought." The man then returned home and asked himself, "How is it that I believe I have made progress toward awakening by using thought?" As he passed an alleyway, a voice called out to him, "Psst, come here. I've got something important to tell you." But he kept on walking, knowing that anything you can tell is, by its very nature, incapable of being important. A tongue that says, no rest for the weary, is never part of a matching set with ears that are at peace. Everyone can pretend that they're a genius when working from a script. Notice, even to the ordinary, it's not life that's confusing. rather your thoughts about it. Finality and the ditty. The song is over when there's no one left to sing to. Something that could be taken as indicative of progress, if you're interested in such matters, is finding something now expendable to your struggle that initially struck you as the ultimate discovery and miraculous method. Enlightenment that does not constantly expand is gradually extinguished. There exists no inflammable maps. No man knows what is right and true until he has experienced it. And those who say that they do beforehand are liars and fools. Weekly, a succession of changing signs was seen in front of a certain clinic. First, convictions cause fat, followed by being overweight as the result of beliefs. Then, opinions produce obesity. And on the fourth week, in a climactic, exasperated, let it all hang out explosion, appeared the one which declared, if you think you're a lard ass. The awakened do not, they cannot live by other men's ideas. Hey, if the enlightened can't see the obvious, who can? Conversation overheard in a home regarding the economics of matters unspecified. Your bill's not high enough. Well, I'm charging stuff as fast as I can. A man went to the cave of a stranger and said to him, it would be my great pleasure if I could ask you a most important question. And the strange one replied, and it would be my great pleasure to answer you, but come back when you no longer think or speak. As he sat, periodically glancing down his gun barrel, pretending that he was considering cleaning it, the sheriff thought to himself, I am beginning to truly believe that I would feel much, much better if I would run some of these varmints out of town for good. And after several more passionate glances down the barrel, thought further. In fact, I suspect that all it would take would be to run them all off. And for just a moment, as the sun struck the metal, it seemed as though the barrel smiled. If you don't yet have your own necessary way of doing things, you don't yet have your own necessary way of doing things if you have a way of doing things that you can describe. Headline, Death and the Discovery of What Enlightenment Might Be About. Only others can die, not I. The others must die, in fact, so that I may live. Terminality and the uncertainty. The debate is finished once the opposition disappears. Personal injury and the matter of presence. You can't be hurt if you've already left the building. Headline, How to Tell for Sure. When you're home alone, baby, you're home. For the sake of something I wanted to point out, let's momentarily use this description that the efforts that men have made to affect this internal change in their awareness, consciousness, mind. For a moment, let me give it a specific use for several of the terms. Instead of talking about one absolute final change in one's consciousness, let's say that there are a smaller number that lead up to a big one. And let's just call the smaller ones little awakenings, to use one of the time-honored descriptions that man is living out his conscious life as it were in a dream compared to what it could be. And that those who undertake such activities as this, the successes could be called in the beginning a series of awakenings, that each one seems to bring you a little more out of that fog. But then let's say, just for the sake of this, then let's say there is the enlightenment. Let's just say that is the final, the big one. It's as though all the small awakenings, the same as a man being in bed, that you have throughout the years undergone a number of these awakenings, somewhat like trying to get out of bed in the morning when you've got a few minutes before you have to jump out, that you get a little awake, and then a little more awake, and a little more awake. And then finally, it's as though, at the same time we can say that you're sleeping by a window, your bed, and the sun is just gradually coming up. But then finally, it reaches above the horizon, and your whole room is just flooded with light, which you know means it's time to absolutely get up. So let's call that the enlightenment, that the whole room is lit, and let's say that is the ultimate. Using that, are any of you aware, I can state as an absolute fact, are you aware of the fact that had it not been for those who experienced only the minor awakenings, had it not been for them writing, you would have never heard of the awakening or the enlightenment? No one would ever heard of it. Is that plain enough? For the sake of what I'm saying, which is, I'll admit, or I'll profess it to be ad hoc. That if it had been up to those who reached the final stage, if there was one, if it had been up to them, if it was still up to them, but had it been up to them, none of us would have ever heard of it. Put quite crudely, if there is an ultimate payoff, if there is a once and for all limit, just a supreme state, and you call that success, then you would have never heard of the effort to awaken, to achieve enlightenment, to change your state of consciousness, had it not been for the writings of those who failed. But do notice this, the writings of those who failed never say that they failed. The writings that you read, although it's not claimed to be failures, but all of the assumed important records, utterances, directions of the great enlightened ones of the past, even those that, from looking at those that apparently wrote either themselves or knew that their words were being taken down. So if you take it at face value, they were addressing the ages and saying, well, here's how I did it, or here's how you should do so-and-so, and here's how here's how an awakened man would act or think, and here's how an enlightened person would go about such and such. They never say, it should be obvious once I point out, they never say, I am here today to write a book, or I'm offering out this lecture to you people who showed up to describe how a man can achieve the great enlightenment. And I'm here to tell you that on the basis that I have failed doing it. And so I'm glad that you arrived here, and that certainly will be of your benefit, and it will be a bargain for whatever you paid at the door, and there'll be the T-shirts and my tapes later. Of course, none of this has any bearing on the fact of whether the so-called famous figures of history that you've heard of existed or not. That's beside the point. But it is written, all of the history, not some of it, not a little of it, not just the faulty methods, not just the disciplines and approaches that might be lacking. It's not just that section of the mystical record was written by the failures. All of it. Every word of it. If that be true, which it is, what can you make of that? We're not interested in history. What can you make of that could be of some use? I repeat one more time, I am exaggerating to say that there is an absolute, because only last night I was talking about the same sort of thing. But there is a purpose to this, and there is some validity to look at it, that there is a series of increasingly potent states that you go through. But then let's say that there is an ultimate, just a big one that is of such a climactic, discrete shift in consciousness that it would deserve another name. And if you, those of you that are well read in this sort of stuff, you may know that it's very common, or not uncommon, for people long before me, thousands of years ago, to throw in little notations about that. There's never been, to my knowledge, a great deal written or thought about it, but there have been little notations that, such as, I was thinking of some of the better known Far Eastern so-called mystical schools that thousands of years ago would refer to things such as little awakenings and supreme awakenings that had even more differentiations in terms than those two, but that's what it amounted to, that they would even say that there are the small awakenings, and then there is the big one. There's the big one where you understand it all. I mean, it's not all that strange. It makes sense, if I didn't already verbally make it not make sense. But it would be like reaching some plateau in the study of mathematics or physics or almost anything, I guess, that you would finally feel. In fact, the ordinary world tries to display the reality of this by the PhD, which is, in theory, the whole purpose of it. If you receive a doctoral from a university, theoretically, what that represents or signifies is that you represent the collective knowledge of the university in that particular field. If they award you a PhD in chemistry, then, of course, obviously not literally, but it was and still is considered to be their display that you presented to the experts in chemistry of that university. You presented yourself before them, you wrote papers, you answered questions, you presented your knowledge, you laid it out to their experts. And perhaps some people from other fields, but at least the experts in your field. And after much deliberation, in their wisdom, they decided that you were equal to their knowledge. That your knowledge, your understanding of chemistry was now world class. But at least it represented, figuratively speaking, collectively, it represented the collective wisdom of blank university's chemistry department. So if you're ordinary, the point is, if you get a PhD, as you know, from one view, you have had the supreme awakening in chemistry. Well, it literally does. It is though the rest of the time you build up, a bachelor's and a master's would be like small awakenings. And then the PhD would be like the big one. But if you never got it, then just having a bachelor's in chemistry, you would feel yourself better off, and we'll assume you would be. At least you had no more chemistry crap than somebody that only took chemistry in high school. So this is not unknown. It's nothing all that strange. But now think about this. When I was saying that there's something useful behind this, as strange as it may at first sound, is always this kind of thing. There is no such thing, for those of you that just came in tonight, there is no such thing as this kind of thing. That's why I have to call it this kind of thing and make gestures and go, this kind of thing, because there is no such kind of thing. But in a person's mind that undertakes this kind of thing, we're back to a place where this is absolutely, I can't believe I'm going to say absolutely unique, but hey, when it rains in the city, even I finally get affected. We all do. This is unique. This is singular again in this respect, that it is just the opposite. That in the ordinary world of the mind, education, chemistry, anything, it is the experts who write the textbooks on chemistry. It is those who are the recognized experts in chemistry who receive the teaching post at the better universities. I mean, all this is just nothing other than common sense, common knowledge, even though it's not described in detail. People don't analyze it, but you know damn well, everything else being equal and life running at some balanced mechanical fashion, then a man who is much more proficient in his understanding and his ability to verbalize his understanding of chemistry is more likely to get a teaching position at Harvard than he is the University of Alabama. And then he is more likely the first amongst the equals in the chemistry department at Cambridge. Well, eventually, everything else being running clockwise, he will eventually rise to head of the department. So it is the experts. If you want to learn chemistry, if you just want to read about chemistry, what you want to do if you were just doing it on your own, as a matter of fact, you would go to a bookstore and you would look for something that would be, and it's probably say the text was written by Dr. So-and-so, and you might glance in or look on the back and see that he is the head of the chemistry department at Caltech. You would pick that up as opposed to if right next to it it says everything you ever wanted to know about chemistry, and it looked sort of a shoddy deal, and you look down and the author was Buford Ledbetter. And you turn to the title page and you notice that it's published by the Ledbetter Publishing Company Incorporated of Mobile, Alabama. And plus, chemistry was misspelled in the title of the book. You get the point. You would, if you just simply wanted to learn chemistry, you would pick up, there's no doubt, you would look to someone who is successful, someone who knows chemistry, correct? Someone who succeeded. How about this Buford Ledbetter? Maybe it turns out he applied to it. Maybe he got in on some kind of, God knows what, some kind of scholarship to Yale and flunked out after the second day. And when they found out that he misspelled his own name or something. And so anyway, the preface of his book is him whining and complaining about how he's an overlooked genius. You would look at that and go, well, the man failed. I mean, if nothing else on the title, forget my thing about he misspelled. But if you just glanced through, you didn't know which book to get. And you glanced through and you looked at as I said, maybe on the back cover of a legitimately published book, it would tell that Dr. So-and-so, the first textbook, was the head of the chemistry department at Yale. And so you glanced through the other one by Buford Ledbetter, no title on his name, but you look through there and you just glance through the preface, and it immediately starts out this big harangue about how the academic world is conspiring against him to keep him out of school, and he understands more about chemistry, and it's just some kind of communist or Yankee plot or some kind of plot. You would recognize immediately Buford may be a fine family man. He may have a nice garden or pickup truck, but the man failed at chemistry. You would understand he's a failure. You would go to one who was successful. Looked at another way, not just you, but only those successful, again, in the general sense of it, only they survive. Only his book will survive in the marketplace at this time. Buford Ledbetter will have to come out in some way, con his way, to let him put it up there, guarantee sales, maybe have to give him a bribe. You know that his book is not going to survive. It is only those in that world of the intellect, that imaginary world, but in that world, it must meet certain criteria. The person must be successful for the work to be successful. That is, for the work, if this one, although we all know that chemistry changes, all the sciences changed, but if he kept it updated, kept revising it, then let's say that his work would survive for hundreds of years, well, for his lifetime. And of course, there are books in other areas, mathematics. Euclid's basic writings have survived now for 2,500 years. So you would say, well, the man was in his limited area, at least in the basics of geometry, the man was absolutely successful. And not just the man, what he knew. Now let's separate it from Euclid. They're still selling that book today. It still sells. Somebody's still reprinting it and people still buy it and learn from it. 2,500 years. There is success. We have mystical literature older than that. And you'd have to say, well, it's very successful. the inspiration of the words, the details of what they described. I mean, it's much better, obviously, than some crackpot on the street corner now, or some guy wandering the streets with a turban on, and one of those cut-rate turbans at that, claiming that God talks to him or that he's a mystic. There seems to be something about literature that's 3,000 years old, reprinted in 50 languages, continued to be read today. It was written by the failures. It is only in this area that occurs. It bleeds over, for those of you that already think about, into religion, the parts of this kind of activity that religion has adopted, which is the wellspring, of course, for all religious ideas, which is not important, but it is written by the failures. When it comes to a man, the actual attempt for a person to change their understanding, to experience the so-called enlightenment and awakening, there would be no such ideas as enlightenment or awakening. There would be no literature, but the words would not even be there had it not been for the failures, in the sense as I described them. I ask you again, do you sense any use you could make of that inside of your own head? May I read again, rhetorically speaking, because I'm going to do it anyway. May I read again from last night a list of low-fat oatmeal. No, that's the wrong list. Oh, here it is. The thing that wants me to awaken is the same thing that stops me. The only me I have is the one that wants me to be enlightened, and also the one thing that stands in my way. The I in me of clarity and certainty is also the source of all my confusion. My best friend turns out to also be my worst nightmare. There are not numerous I's in me, but only one with numerous moods and ideas. Only one mind, only one me, subject to changes of mind. And I do not have one good I that is in there trying to work on the less admirable ones. What seems to be me is only an emptiness filled with an never-ending flow of thoughts. Thus, there is no I, no me, no mind other than the one reading, the one hearing this statement. Hence, no awakening of anything in me beyond what I am at this instant, and no enlightenment coming at any other time but this very moment. I ask you again, does it make any sense? Do you see how you could use the fact, see, the way I present it to you, that you would have never heard? There would be no history, there would be no literature regarding enlightenment or awakening had it not been for the writing, had it not been for the activities of the failures. What do you make of the fact, if you sit there at this instant, just for the sake of conversation, let's say that if this instant, if I said, do you consider yourself awake, enlightened? We'll assume that you would say no, just based upon the relative validity that I assume you place upon experience, and knowing that whatever you now know and have experienced cannot be the ultimate, or you assume it's not. And so even though you may have had numerous experiences of what I was calling earlier for the night small awakenings, if I said, do you consider yourself awake? Do you consider yourself enlightened? You know, like with a big period at the end. If there's anything to you, you would, of course, to yourself, you'd go, well, no, I certainly don't. I wouldn't be here, for one thing. I certainly wouldn't be here. Then, back to my question, what do you make of the fact of how sincerely, how hard you have tried, you continue to try? Not that you've never had any successes, but I repeat to you, to a man who knows anything, a past success if you can even remember it, your memory is far too good. You still got a shitty, ordinary, everyday memory. In other words, it doesn't count. But, so forgetting the past, still assuming, we're operating on the assumption that you have had what we'll call some small awakenings, that you certainly no longer can tolerate, you no longer have in you any ordinary view of life. It is once and for all gone from the first small awakening. Your view of life is never the same. But even that being a given, then I ask you, are you enlightened? Are you, have you made it now? And the answer, as I said, would be no. Or I could say, are you satisfied with your enlightenment? Are you satisfied with what you understand now? And your answer would be no. Or else you wouldn't be here. You still wouldn't be fooling with it. Then my question was, well, what do you make of that in regard to my history lesson for the night of saying that there would be no history of enlightenment? You would have never heard of it had it not been for the writings, for the utterances of the failures. Now back to you. What do you make of how sincere you try? Think of how much you know. You're supposed to be drawing parallels now between the great cache, the staggering repertoire of mystical writings, histories, utterances, speeches, dictums, etc. There is something parallel in you. All of your ideas about awakening. All of what you believe that you know for a fact, all that you suspect, just everything. You have a whole library in your mind of ideas, notions, laws, theories, whatever you call them, just a whole potpourri, a gamut, from opinions to suspicions to things you accept as facts. But let's call that your history of awakening. Do you see any useful parallel between that and what I said, that the external history, the record, but the very history, the notion, but let's call it the history of awakening, the history of the struggle for enlightenment, from top to bottom, beginning to end, was written by failures, only by them. Not conditional, not just some of it, all of it. The entire record is a record of failures. Now back to you. You don't see how that would explain? You got to put that in quotation marks, because explain to a man who understands anything, explain doesn't explain anything. Explain is a rocket stuck in a very private and tender part of your metaphysical body. Explain, that means, whoa, I didn't realize that. So we don't use explain around here as a as an exculpatory. It's not an excuse. It's not an explanation. It explains something. It makes you go. Or you look at something that you've already been looking at, and rather than looking at it as you have been, you go. Your vision of it, your understanding of it expands. Now back to my question. Do you see any possible use, or do you see, and when I say use, to see why it might appear that progress can be so slow in coming when you are so vigorous and so sincere in your effort, in your interest, in what you believe or what you consider to be your thinking about it, your study of it, your pondering of it. But now back, we'll try it again. Well, what if I point out to you, what if you say, well, I can't understand why I don't make more progress than I do. I quit going to movies. I threw away my television. All I have are the great mystical writings. I have sold most of my possessions. I have ordered obscure works. I have my whole library. My house is full. All I do is read books about that. Why am I not doing better? And then I say, well, what you're reading are the utterances, the ideas of failures, one and all. You don't have to tell me who. If it's in there, it was written, said by a failure, in the sense as I described it tonight in that artificial ad hoc scenario I proposed to start with. But still, that being the case, do you see any parallel, useful parallel, not some theoretical or verbal punchline I'm trying to pull, but consider that everything that you think, well, I'll go ahead and say it for you. Everything that you think, you understand what you means. It means you personally, and it means Buddha and Jesus and anybody else you can imagine that ever said anything. Everything that you think about awakening is the thoughts of a loser. It has to be. Because if you knew what it was, you would have no thoughts about it. So your very best thoughts, and I am not discrediting your thoughts in particular, because as I pointed out, we'll assume that I'm addressing people who have had experience, and that your view of life, your understanding of life is now irreversibly, radically different than everyone else's, and that yours used to be. That you have a much clearer idea, a sight of what is going on in life than that which is totally clouded by thought. But be that the case. In other words, we're establishing that your library, your individual personal library of mystical information is superior to all of those about you. Let's take that as a given. That does not change it. It's still writ. It was still conjured up. It is still from the source of a loser. If you think it, it's the thoughts of a loser. And I don't care if it's the thoughts about enlightenment. It makes no difference. Only losers think. I thought everybody translated properly the sign that said, if you think, you're a lard ass. It just got it over with. For those of you, I hate to judge whether it went over or it didn't go over, but it was the signs in front of a clinic that changed over a 4-week period. And it started out and said, convictions cause fat. I was there for a week, and the next week it said, obesity is the product of opinions. And then it says, the third week it said, beliefs cause all problems of being overweight. And then the fourth week it just blew it all out and just got it over with and just simply said, if you think, you're a lard ass. If you think, you're a loser. And it doesn't matter what you think about. That's part of the sly slope that the mind is always faced with. With ordinary people, it doesn't matter. I repeat, when you're playing in an imaginary world of chemistry, art, religion, anything else other than this inside of you, and not even this as we're doing it now, because me staying here talking to you is not much better than Buford Ledbetter if he came up and bought some kind of damn phony baloney diploma from the University of, Tuscaloosa or Bogalusa, and now I got him a job teaching chemistry. This is not much better. But we're talking about inside of each person. In every area but this, it doesn't matter where the information came from, which most of you are still in for some. I can promise a few more laughs and fun if you continue this, because I know most of you by now would agree theoretically, but you still, I assure you, you haven't gotten the last laugh. You hadn't gotten the last smile that'll almost break your face when you finally realize that everything, of course, if you knew what I was talking about, I wouldn't have to hurt myself and risk another hernia by going, everything. I just say everything. All knowledge is equal. And all knowledge is absolutely meaningless. It is nothing. All knowledge, everything that every human knows, everything that every human has ever known, they made up. And part of what keeps people from having to face that, if you say, well, everything everybody knows they made up, and a person thinks, well, I didn't make it up because I went to school. Some other human made it up, you picklehead. But to finally, trust me, you'll keep on going, and you may have seen it and had a good laugh before, but they're not, that area is not laughter depleted yet. Trust me, that it'll finally hit you just once and for all, and then you're free from all of that. To realize that everything, and it takes a while, I know it, and it's in stages, like I said, that it does fit Apparently the kind of descriptions of little small awakenings, and it keeps expanding and expanding. But to finally just realize it. You can't hear it, and you can't say, I believe it. You can't say, well, I've got good reason to believe it. When you actually see it, you'll never mention it again. It's up to somebody like me having to talk about it. But to realize that everything, I don't know how to keep saying it, but it is just so amazing when you see it. So refreshing, if I might put. It is though 10,000 collars and harnesses have been taken from you. That didn't amount to a lot to start with. That's exaggerating. But to realize that no one in the world, I'll put it up right quick in little stages, that first, I'll make this up, that the first second when you really get to this stage of seeing it is like the first second when you see it, you go, my God, I suddenly understand that nobody on this planet, no human, has ever known or does know now more than I do. That's momentary. And then you think, wait a minute. The next one's the big one. The next one is, you go, wait a minute. Nobody that's ever been alive on this planet, including now and including me, knows anything. And you know that those words at an everyday, sane level are inoperative, because everybody knows things that seem to be true, that somebody can tell you how to repair something, how to rebuild a carburetor, somebody tell you how to handle watercolors if you want to take up painting, somebody tell you how to pick a lock. There's all kinds of things that apparently the information is true, that's real. And for me to say it doesn't mean anything, it does seem to mean something. Somebody tell you how to open your car when you've locked the keys inside. And you think, well, boy, it saved me $25. They showed me how to get a coat hanging. And so you say, it is meaningful. Except, remember this. This doesn't change that. It's made up. There is simply no such thing as knowledge. And only those who see it know it. Because you can't argue it, you can debate it forever. And I just took one side of it, that somebody can say, wait a minute, there is knowledge. Knowledge is real. Here is how knowledge helped me specifically. Knowledge saved my life. Knowledge, whatever, you can prove it if you don't know any better. But there is no such thing as knowledge. It is a total invention. If you can say it, it's made up. And it's only people who are totally captive of that world, which is ordinary people. No problem, nothing wrong with it. But they totally live in that world. That is, as far as the consciousness, as attention is concerned. They also live in the physical world like we all do, so to speak. But ordinary people live in that mental world that is all invented.